Well, good morning. Good morning, friends. Welcome to Lakeview. My name is Paul, if you're visiting with us, and I have the honor of being the lead pastor here. Welcome, welcome. Spring is finally here. Snow is melting. It is joyful. In fact, I'm probably responsible for this melt because I washed the truck the other day, and so now it's going to get muddy, but I'll take it. I'm so happy spring is here. Now, I don't know if any of you, especially maybe those of you that are a little bit older than school age, if any of you still get those school nightmares. You know which ones I'm talking about? Yeah, okay, a few of you. You know, you're suddenly back in school in your dream, it's exam day, you haven't studied, you don't know the schedule, you can't find the classroom, your heart's pounding, you're sweating, everyone else seems to be calm and know what they're doing, but you're completely lost. And then, just to top it all off, you're naked. Just me? All right. You feel exposed. Every insecurity, every fear boiling up in you in this awful moment that you know, in this moment, in this, all the stuff that's happening at the same time, that you finally will be exposed for who you really are. Talk about vulnerability. Now, those of you who are still in school might be wondering, wait, these nightmares continue after you graduate? Yes, they do. Yes, they do. You know, in fact, I actually lived one of these moments in real life, not the naked part. I had just moved to Canada, and my English was non-existent, so most of my school days were spent learning English and doing some math. That was like my days. Learn English, do some math. And my learning English wasn't great. They sat me by myself in a cafeteria with this machine, and you had this big card that would say cat on it. And then there's like a magnetic strip, and you put it in the machine and go, cat, cat, cat. That was my learning English. It worked, though. I got it. So those were my days. I definitely know what a cat is. And I would, sit there and learn English and do math. And about after 6 months, I still couldn't really speak English well, but I had gotten really good at reading body language. I got really good at kind of hearing the tone people had, the gestures that they were doing, and kind of just read the situation. And, you know, I would guess kind of what people are asking me to do, or what they're inviting me to do, or what was happening in the classroom. I would kind of figure it out and just join in because I kind of got good at like understanding what people are trying to do. And I was right about 65% of the time. Now you laugh, but 65 is not a bad percentage. Like if I was to say, if you were to buy lottery and you have 65% chance of winning, you'd be like, hey, that's pretty good odds. I'm not saying buy lottery, but those are not bad percentages. And it was working well till one day when I had a substitute teacher. And to be fair, she didn't know I didn't speak English, and I was pretty good at this point, blending in and getting kind of really good at mimicking whatever everybody else was doing in the class. And at some point that day, she called me up to the front of the class. Now, I quickly tried to decode what she was asking me. And honestly, this part is a little bit blurry in my mind. I don't know if, I've repressed the memories. I was trying to really access them this weekend, but I couldn't get them, so I might need some help. But it's pretty foggy in my brain. But what I do remember is that I thought I understood what she wanted me to do was to clean the chalkboard. And so, don't get ahead of me. So I take the eraser and I start wiping the chalkboard, and I'm going hard and fast. I want to do it well. And then there's just, the classroom erupts in laughter. And everybody's laughing. And I turn, why are they laughing? And I look at her and she looks at me, and I look at the class, and we're all like doing this look thing. And both my eyes and her eyes, there's a lot of confusion. I noted her confusion, and I looked at the class who's still laughing, and looked back at her. Her confusion began to shift into anger. Apparently, I was wiping away everything she had carefully written on the board for the class and had not asked me to clean it up. She, in turn, interpreted my actions as disrespectful, just goofing off, being a class clown, disrupting the class. So I stood there frozen as she's furious, and now she's saying things, and I know the tone is not good. And my heart is racing, and I'm trying to do something. The class is laughing. It's a weird situation. And eventually I found myself in the hallway sitting alone outside the classroom. Yeah, right? I was exposed, helpless, unable to fix the situation. Now, I don't know if you've ever had a moment like that, where your weakness, your vulnerability is suddenly visible for all to see. And there's just nothing you can do to cover it up. And there's nothing you can do to make it right. It's just there, and you're stuck, and your heart's beating, and you're just exposed, helpless, having no control. Now, this year, our pastoral staff had read the book Strong and Weak by Andy Crouch. And I highly recommend it if you haven't read it, and I think we still have a few copies in our bookstore. It's a fantastic book. Really enjoyed it as we unpacked it as a staff. And Andy offers a simple but powerful framework in his book. It's kind of a 2x2 chart. And I'll be honest, I actually don't like 2x2 charts. I don't like any kind of like grids or, Excel sheets. And I know it's going to upset some people. Like, just my brain doesn't work that way, and I usually grind against those things. But Andy does this amazing job of making this chart work. And in this chart, he maps out authority and vulnerability. And he uses this as a tool for understanding how these two dynamics shape human experience and influence whether we flourish or break down, both as individuals, communities, or even systems. And so one of his key insights is this. He says, flourishing happens when both authority and vulnerability are present together, when strong and weak are together, when both vulnerability and authority are present. But when they're separated, when there's authority but no vulnerability, or there's vulnerability but there's very little authority, we move towards distortion and harm. We find ourselves in different quadrants of his 2x2. That feeling of being exposed and powerless, Andy names it clearly. He says that's suffering. That's suffering, which he defines high vulnerability with low authority. A state where someone is at real risk, yet unable to act meaningfully. He also points out that this isn't just a personal moment. It can happen to us personally, but it's actually also a systemic injustice. When systemic injustice happens, we also can find ourselves in this suffering quadrant with lots of vulnerability and very low authority. We find ourselves in these moments when in circumstances when we're stripped of our agency, both personally or collectively. Now, we as Lakeview have been journeying through our Lenten series, Jesus Unvarnished, where we have witnessed Jesus stepping into our shoes, embracing our vulnerabilities, and so far we have seen him tested, misunderstood, exposed, and even ignored. So today we encounter a profound and complex moment in God's story, where Jesus steps into a high-stakes, tense situation, a situation where authority is questioned and vulnerability is on full display. So the story is found in the Gospel of John, chapter 8, starting in verses 1 to 11. We're going to read it together. If you have Bibles, you can flip to it, but it's going to be on the screen here. Jesus returned to the Mount of Olives, but early the next morning, he was back again at the temple. A crowd soon gathered, and he sat down and taught them. As he was speaking, the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. They put her in front of the crowd. "Teacher," they said to Jesus, "this woman was caught in an act of adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say?" They were trying to trap him into saying something they could use against him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote in the dust with his finger. They kept demanding an answer, so he stood up again and said, "All right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone." Then he stooped down again and wrote in the dust. When the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest, until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. Then Jesus stood up again and said to the woman, "Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" "No, Lord," she said. And Jesus said, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." What a story. A group of religious leaders drag a woman caught in adultery before Jesus. Notably, only the woman. The man's nowhere to be seen, just the woman. And then they quote scripture trying to trap Jesus. And it's an interesting trap, isn't it? If he rejects the law, they can accuse him of blasphemy. If he approves of this execution, he contradicts his own message of mercy and grace, a message that he's been so obviously preaching throughout his ministry. And so instead of answering them directly, we just learned that Jesus kneels down and writes on the ground, writes in the dust. And they're anxious. They demand an answer. And so he stands up and says, "Let one without sin throw the first stone." And then one by one, the accusers walk away, leaving only Jesus and the woman. When he asks her, "Does no one condemn you?" "No one." "Well, then neither do I. Go, leave your life of sin." Now, I retell this story because one way to understand this moment is as a wonderful lesson about how we should be less judgmental. How Jesus shows the religious leaders they too have sinned. Come on, you blind leaders, you've sinned too. Don't throw stones at people when they screw up because you have also screwed up. Why are you condemning them? You've done this too. Give people grace because you too would want grace given to you, right? And that's a great message. And it certainly is one way to read this passage. Honestly, we could all use more grace, right? We could all use less stone throwing. But why the detail about Jesus bending down and writing in the dust? And why did whatever he was writing on the ground and what he said cause the religious leaders to walk away? And why do the older men walk away first? And why does John include all these details for us? Is it just a story about Jesus saying, "Just be more gracious, guys. Come on, you've sinned too. What are you doing?" Or is there more going on here? It certainly is a good message to offer grace. Please don't misunderstand me. It is an important message. None are without sin. But what if the story is actually holding a lot more than catches the eye? What if there's actually more going on in the plot and in the setting of this story that we're just not aware of if we just read chapter 8, verses 1 to 11? Can I suggest to really grasp the meaning of what's happening here, we actually need to read before and after. Now, for time's sake, we're just going to look a little bit before. We're going to look at John chapter 7. And I'm just going to kind of explain to help us understand what is the meaning of the story. You see, in chapter 7, we have learned that the setting of the events that are happening in Jerusalem, all the things that are going on, is actually a festival of tabernacles. We all know what that is, right? One of the major Jewish feasts, rich in symbolism and deeply connected to survival and hope. Now, friends, I get it. Biblical festivals can be confusing, and we skip them over because we don't practice many of them. And it's like you read them, and it's like, okay, that's great. Okay, let's move on to a story that I actually can understand and what's happening. I get it. But it's really actually important for this story for us to know that it was the Festival of Tabernacles. It's a very important background that shapes the meaning of the story. So here's what we need to know. The Festival of Tabernacles was the final celebration of the Jewish year. It happened in the fall, at the fall harvest, when people prayed for winter rains because no rain meant no crops, no food, no future. And so if there's no rain, if we don't pray and if God doesn't bring the blessings and the water doesn't come, our livelihood's at stake. And as a farming province, we get that. We understand, I complain about shoveling snow in the winter and all that kind of stuff. And we're like, oh, when is it going to go away? But we actually need the moisture. We get it. If we don't have the moisture, our land will not grow the crops. And if we don't have the crops, our livelihoods, our economy, and our feeding of the world suffers. So we understand this is what the festival's about. It's all about we need water, God. During the winter, bring the rains, bring the rains. And they're praying for it. And so thousands would gather in Jerusalem for 8 days of worship, prayer, and remembrance. And as they gathered there, they would live in makeshift shelters that we call tabernacles. They makeshift shelters. And these shelters were a reminder that as their ancestors long ago depended on God and survived in the wilderness, so they were going to be in these little shelters and they were going to pray for provision. And the big theme of this whole festival is water. That was the major theme. And not just physically, not just that we just need rains and we need the crops to grow, but actually spiritually. And then the religious leaders would speak of rain and thirst and provision and this deeper longing for water in our soul. And all of this 8 days would build to the final day when the high priest would pour water and wine on the altar. And the crowd would chant, Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna. Which means, God save us, God save us, God save us. It is in that moment, at the height of the festival, in chapter 7, that Jesus stood up and cried out. In the midst of all this loudness and all this praising and talking about water, Jesus cries out, let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. In other words, I'm the source. I'm the living water. What you're praying for, what you're looking for, I'm here. This is the backdrop of John 8. Because it's right after this feast that a group of religious leaders drag the woman caught in adultery before Jesus. And he kneels and he begins to write in the dust. Why dust? Well, for one, dust is what you have when there's no water. But also, I think about what those religious leaders had been teaching all week about thirst and water and spiritual dependence. And the one key passage that we know that the religious leaders would have used and read over and over during this festival is found in Jeremiah 17. And it reads, Lord, you are the hope of Israel. All who forsake you will be put to shame. Those who turn away from you will be written in the dust, because they have forsaken the Lord, the spring of the living water. Jesus takes that teaching, takes their own words from this festival, and enacts it in silence. He writes in the dust. You see, this story isn't just about an accused woman. It's about religious leaders so consumed with power and control, they're willing to use Scripture as a weapon to accomplish their will. After all, what's the force of the story we read in chapter 8? They want to trap Jesus. They want to trap Jesus, who has been putting their leading and their authority into question. They want to eliminate this Jesus who, in their high festival, screamed that he is the living water. You see, the religious leaders take a vulnerable person who undoubtedly did something wrong. But these leaders clearly actually don't care about her sin. They actually don't care about her. What we see in their actions is how they're willing to expose, mock, and use her as cannon fodder to trap and unseat this Jesus from the position of power and authority that he's gaining. How dare he yell that he is the source of living water? This woman is simply a scapegoat. She's a scapegoat for their mission of murder. But Jesus doesn't play their game, does he? He doesn't rebuke them with passages of Scripture. He doesn't point to the law of Moses and explain how they were to care for the widows and the vulnerable and the orphans, how they were to be light to the world. He doesn't do any of that. He simply disarms this mob, restores dignity, and reminds everyone who the true source is. He does this by writing in the dust. So what does Jesus write in the dust? Maybe their names. Many theologians suggested he wrote their sins, their names. He knew them all. And being exposed to their own sins and their own vulnerability in shame, they begin to walk away. Maybe. Could be. But I think what he's doing in the context of Jeremiah is he's revealing their power and authority of exploitation. He says, those who turn away from you will be written in the dust. He exposes how they have turned away from God. He exposes what they truly care about, power and control. And he writes it in the dust. He enacts. He theatrically writes what Jeremiah prophesies. He exposes their turning from him and their hearts full of coercive power. After all, these spiritual leaders were part of the temple institution, right? Do we understand this? They were part of the institution that ruled the Jewish tribe, an institution that controlled politics and religion and economics and culture. This institution, as we read, has become corrupt. It actually doesn't care for the powerless, the thing that God reminded them to do. It ignores God's mandate to care for the vulnerable, to see the least of these. And worse than that, it uses the least. It uses the vulnerable as cannon fodder, as a scapegoat. It only cares about itself. It is exercising high authority, all the strength and power it has, with no vulnerability. There's no risk to them. There's no risk. Even within the law of Moses, there's no risk to them. The idea of participating in the stoning of someone, this horrific execution, there's no direct guilt. Now, in the Old Testament and the ancient cultures, stoning was a common form of execution, gruesome, horrific. And friends, it's not efficient. It's not the best way to execute somebody. But it was communal. Everyone could participate by throwing a stone while distancing themselves from the outcome. They could say, I didn't kill her. I just threw one stone, maybe two. I didn't do it. This is exactly the kind of collective violence Jesus is confronting. When the crowd cites the law of Moses and calls for stoning, Jesus refuses to let them hide behind the mob or their systems of coercive power. I want you to hear this. He won't let them kill together and claim innocence alone. He won't let them kill together and claim innocence alone. Can I bring this a little bit home? Can you think of systems we participate in where we say, well, it's not me. I'm just one person. It's the system. It's not me. That's exactly what's happening here. The system turns out to be the mob, demanding blood. Even after 8 days of crying out to God, bless us, bring us rain. Oh, bless our souls, quench our thirst for you, God. We love you. Feed us. And now, after wanting God to bless them and quench their thirst, they want to trap the very one who dares to say, I am the living water. So yes, this story is about a woman caught in adultery. But it's also about so much more. It's about power and control and what happens when authority becomes collective violence. But Jesus is so brilliant here. He doesn't directly attack the mob, does he? Instead, he shifts the lens from the collective to the personal. Let the one without sin cast the first stone. He doesn't explicitly condemn stoning, this horrific thing, but he simply calls for self-reflection, for each person to stop hiding behind the crowd or the system or the mob and take responsibility for their hearts. And with that one sentence, he shatters the mob's demonic unity. No more hiding behind Legion. No more hiding behind the group. No more hiding behind the mob. No more hiding behind power structures that control and destroy. And one by one, they begin to walk away. Now, why do the eldest go leave first? Again, theologians wrestle with this one. There's a lot of ways to unpack it, but I think it's because with age comes wisdom. With time, you begin to be more contemplative and self-aware, and you realize, even too late, even though you found yourself in a mob, you realize, ooh, I am in a mob. I am acting out in a way that God didn't mean for me to act out. They recognize the bigger picture. They recognize that Jesus isn't just disarming a crowd, he's confronting an entire power structure, religious, political, social, built on control and exploitation that is rooted in their heart. And one by one, they leave. It's a powerful story of confronting evil, of confronting murderous desires, of confronting a structure and a system bigger than yourself that you know is hurting and destroying people, and using the vulnerable as cannon fodder. She's not without sin. She knows that. She doesn't make excuses. But she's a scapegoat. It's an easy thing to point at and say, that's the problem, without addressing the bigger meta problem that's driving the culture, the spirituality, the religion. I wonder, this isn't in my notes, but I wonder as I speak now if there are scapegoats that we use, that we point to and say, well, that's actually the problem. If you just get rid of this person, then everything will be okay. Without addressing the bigger system in play that's bringing way more harm. Jesus isn't just disarming this mob. He exercises the demonic unity, but he's confronting the power structure. And what happens when someone confronts a corrupt system? What happens? I mean, it still happens today. What happens when we resist, when we confront? Well, when someone does that, even today, they get erased, they get deported, they get discredited, they get gaslit, they get killed. This isn't just a story about judging others. It's about resistance, a radical refusal to participate in any system that robs people of their dignity and their worth. It's refusal to participate in the system that uses the weak and the vulnerable as cannon fodder. And resistance has a cost. Jesus will be killed for this. The cross is where the ultimate authority and the ultimate vulnerability meet. Jesus, in his authority, chooses the cross, and in his vulnerability, endures it fully. The cross becomes the center point where God's power doesn't dominate but loves, where God's strength is revealed in weakness, strong and weak.